Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm going to be talking about the fourth entry into the Total Drama series called Total Drama Revenge of the Island. First things first though, there are going to be plenty of spoilers in this review. So if you haven't seen the whole series and don't want it spoiled for you, it would be the time to back out. Now with that said, overall I think this is a fairly solid entry into the Total Drama franchise. However, while it does have a lot of the strengths that we've come to associate with Total Drama, it also has a lot of the problems that have become routine with the series. So let's get right into it. The first thing that we have right off the bat is that we're dealing with a much shorter season here. Only 13 episodes instead of the regular 22. Word on the internet is this is because Fresh TV got their budget cut. Well, the word on the internet is what it is. But I can't help but feeling that in this case, it's probably true. And you can sort of notice things like, for example, even though Chef is around for episode 1, he doesn't say anything until we're about 3 or 4 episodes in. And I can't help but wonder if this wasn't just a way of saving money on having to pay the actor to talk. And speaking of that sort of thing, did you notice when Izzy turned up, all she did was laugh? I also can't help but wonder if they just didn't recycle one of the laughs that she recorded during the previous episodes just to avoid paying the actress. If it is, I feel bad for these guys for having to do that, but mostly I feel bad for the actors. But, showbiz, right? Anyway, having a shorter run, while isn't actually necessarily a bad thing. One of the nice things about this this season is that except for one episode, somebody went home every single time. In previous seasons, the reward challenges and all that sort of thing kind of felt like they were there to sort of pad things out. And here, by making it so just numerically, somebody always had to go home, it really, really did amp up the drama, and I appreciated that a lot. These ceremonies where people were getting kicked out felt much, much more dramatic, since I knew that there was no coming back for that. Well, okay, Dakota did, but that was outside of the rules, so I'm willing to grant that. Anyway, let's kind of get into the cast of this season. One thing I liked about having a smaller cast is there's just not as much, let's call a spade, chaff laying around. The characters who we can tell early on are going to get chopped. Characters like Ava, Katie, and Sadie. This time around, the only person that we had who was like that was Stacy. And frankly, I think it was just more the fact that, and I'm betting this was deliberate on the part of the writers, she was so insanely annoying, we all wanted her off the island immediately. I swear, I do not think I could have taken more than one episode of that character. Again, and I have a feeling this is what the writers were aiming for, and I'll give them credit. Boy, oh boy, was I glad to see her gone. And, yeah, other than that, I think all the other characters on the show were decent, but let's talk about B for a second. Obviously a riff on Silent Bob from the Kevin Smith movies. He also never says a single word the entire show. And while this is done fairly well, again, it just sort of feels like they were just doing that in order to save money. And it just also really made it clear that B was not going to hang around, because you can't have somebody like that on a show for terribly long. It just doesn't work, especially not a humor show like Total Drama. So let's see. One character that I was sort of disappointed that we didn't get to see more of was Dawn. I thought that she brought a lot of the best traits that characters like Bridget had brought to the series, the nicer people. And I won't lie, I really enjoyed the fact that she was pretty much an obvious riff on Luna Lovegood, my absolute favorite Harry Potter character. But let's face it, Dawn just didn't have that drive needed to last very long on Total Drama. And seeing her booted off really did a lot to amp up my hatred of Scott, who was, of course, this season's arch villain. And I gotta say, he did it really well. He's definitely easily up there with Alejandro and Heather in terms of being a manipulative jerk. And honestly, I'm not really sure which one of them I think would be better at it, Alejandro or Scott. I guess probably Alejandro, since he did make it to the final two, while Scott got the shaft at number 4. So let's see. Let's talk. Oh yes, let's talk about our big romance of the season between Mike and Zoey. Mike, I kind of oscillated about my feelings on Mike this season. You know, Mike's was a nice guy, and what he had going on was, well, certainly a unique thing. At times, it's just like it just felt too much. It's a little silly, I admit, to say too cartoony on what is obviously a cartoon, and a fairly zany one at that. But it's just a matter of taste, really, personal taste. And for me, what they were doing with Mike just pushed it a little too far. Again, I know I'm drawing a very fine line here, and that this is all just a matter of personal taste. But his multiple personality disorders aside, I really was rooting for Mike, and I did find him to be a pretty good character. Again, he draws on the better aspects of the nice guy characters. Sort of like... Whew, wow, I'm very sorry about that. Sorry about that, guys. So let's move on. Yeah, he draws on the aspects of sort of the nice guy characters, like again, as I said, season 1 Trent, Cody to a certain degree, and even Brick, who was also, you know, turned out to be a pretty decent guy. Now let's move on to Zoey, my other favorite character this season. I think she is I think definitely in terms of character and all overall, she's one of the strongest they've had, and she I think ranks up there with I think she ranks up there pretty high on the list of characters that they've created recently. I know that when they introduced Alejandro and Sierra as new characters last season, both of whom I thought were really strong additions to the total drama mythology. And while Zoey very clearly draws on the better aspects of season 1 Gwen, you know, I personally would prefer not to talk about season 3 Gwen, especially the in-your-face Courtney moment. I'm just going to have to pretend for my own love of Gwen that never happened. But anyway, as I was saying, she draws on all the best aspects of season 1 Gwen and just kind of takes away Gwen's passive aggressiveness. And that does a lot to really endure her to me as a viewer. Zoey feels like, out of everybody on the cast, somebody who I would really most want to hang around with. And her relationship with Mike, it was genuinely a very sweet thing, and I really did find myself rooting for them, a lot like I did season 1 Gwen and Trent. So again, they really did go back. I think, especially by going back to the island, they really did, in a lot of ways, go back to a lot of the stuff that made season 1 a very strong entry, and definitely one of my favorites of all the total drama seasons. Okay, so since we're talking about characters, let's briefly talk about the cameo appearances by the past contestants. These really varied in quality. The whole thing with Izzy, that just felt like a throwaway. Gwen's appearance, it didn't really add anything to the show. They just brought Gwen back because she's a popular character. DJ, boy, I'm sorry. You know, I really liked DJ quite a lot in season 1, but by the time season 3 rolled around, I was just itching for them to vote him off the show. He had just turned into such a crybaby. I couldn't stand it. It just seemed like such a waste of someone who had been previously a very likable, nice character. And speaking of that sort of thing, when they brought back Bridget, now she has every reason in the world to dislike Chris and to not trust him. But Bridget really, I think, just doesn't work when she's being mean and rude. That's not who Bridget is to me. Ezekiel. Boy, dude. They really hosed this. Boy, they really hosed Ezekiel. That's all I can say. Yeah, let's not talk about Ezekiel. Let's see. Who else? Oh, yes, Heather. Heather's return. Love seeing Heather again. Was disappointed that she basically hadn't retained any of the growth in becoming a nicer person that I'd come to associate with her. And a lot of props to Lindsay. She, I think, was the best returning character. She was happy to be there, she brought energy to it, and her presence really added to the story of what was going on that episode. Okay, let's see. One thing I do have to complain about, and this is this thing that's been going on in Total Drama for a while now, is it seems that there's a genuine, sometimes mean-spiritedness to what the writers do to some characters. I mean, look at what happened to poor Ezekiel last season. I mean, yeah, he was more than a little bit of a douche in the first season, but that was just mostly because of how he was raised. He actually, I think, wasn't such a bad guy underneath it all. And then they just turned him into Gollum, and now he's hanging around in a mine. No. And then what they did to Scott and Alejandro, they basically trapped them in iron lungs, and of course turned Alejandro into Darth Vader, only minus all the cool stuff that Darth Vader could do. Now granted, Alejandro and Scott were major jerks, but I can't really enjoy them getting their comeuppance if what happens to them seems so much crueler than anything either of them ever did. I mean, watching this last episode, I felt terrible for Scott. I mean, sure, he was a big jerk, but he didn't deserve that. So yeah, let's talk about how things wrapped up. I gotta say though, the final episode of this season, it was some pretty serious win. I had Cameron pegged as being the guy who was going to take it probably around around episode 8, I strongly suspected. And seeing him do this in the way he did was so great. The whole Iron Man thing, him proving that he really had grown so much as a person that he could take down a guy like lightning. It was great. It was really one of those things that just makes you want to cheer, because it's the first time really since season 1 that somebody who was actually a genuinely all-around good person had won. I mean, the last good, really nice person who won was Owen. And the fact that Cameron chose to spend the money on the other contestants because they'd become his friends. Again, this also echoes what we saw in season 1. And it just did. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. It made me feel good. It made me feel happy. It made me want to cheer for the contestants and be happy for them. And of course, it was wonderful to finally see Chris McLean get some comeuppance for all the bad stuff that he has done. It's as somebody once observed, and I think it might have even been his actor, Christian Potenza himself, that Chris will always be the true villain of Total Drama. So anyway, overall, it's a pretty solid season. I'm not really sure quite yet where it ranks on my list of favorites out of the 4 seasons, but I definitely enjoyed watching it. I hope there's a 5th season, and like a lot of the fans, I'm pulling for another season where we get to see a mix and match of the characters from Total Drama, the previous Total Drama series, and this one. I think it would be really cool. So I'm almost out of time, everybody. So as always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter as Who's Your Jedi. Until next time, see ya and have a good one.